Hey everyone, Spencer Burton here. Allow me to introduce Ron Rohde. He is our ACRE legal contributor, and he'll be sharing a walkthrough of one of his real estate legal documents.
Alright guys, I'm going to be walking you through this commercial real estate LOI. You start from the page 1. It's going to have the content name here, author, if we have other people, more information. It's going to be applicable for office, retail, or even perhaps industrial with a few tweaks. I'm going to put version notes here, brokers, existing building versus a new construction or to be built shell building. No detailed tenant improvements. Sometimes if you have a client that has a special use, you're going to want to put in the build out requirements in the LOI. It just gives the landlord a better indication of where they're going to be in terms of the true cost of this tenant. So first, let's start with the date. So pop in today's date. We'll go with the landlord or the landlord's agent. In this case, let's say we're going to submit it to our broker. And that can be Jane. And let's say that she is a broker CBRE. Address. Again, we're just populating what is, I think, some basic email or basic information that's on the internet, public research, or if you have contact information from a sign. This is, again, it's just trying to reflect a little bit of the due diligence that shows who's representing this property. And for your own reference, maybe here we'll have contact information. So again, we'll just populate that. Here we have the purpose of the letter, a letter of intent to lease office space at 123 Main Street, and you can describe it a little bit more particularly, especially in dense urban areas. You're going to have one street address that might have a lot of different types. So you might have a retail portion and then offices above that in the same building. And then this premise is located in Dallas, Texas, 75206. Proposed terms of a lease between, let's say here, I like to use the county records as a great public resource to find out who is the listed owner. And you still may or may not be correct, but at least you have a good shot at representing the, and then we'll call the tenant, my client, LLC. All right, and now we're going to look at the tenant here is going to be called My Client LLC. Again, so you can rename this. Now we describe it as the lease premises because later on during this LOI we'll reference those. So this letter of intent, non-binding, set forth basic terms. And again, really the amount of terms and conditions you put in really depends on the specificity you want to put in. There's kind of a minimum, I would say, that applies to all deals, but there is no maximum. You feel free to lay out all of the important details that you need to make sure that you guys are preserving your time, given what you need to make a deal work, and to see if the parties are even close on all right, personal guarantee. So this one is interesting because let's say that you're going to have one individual, and it may or may not be a large principal, but you may have multiple personal guarantees, and if that's on the table initially, then it helps to relay the relative strength of your offer. If it's a property that is going to need a personal guarantee, this is fully optional. So we'll call that optional. A little bit more description. Lease premises, 3,000 square feet on the first floor of the office park. Again, you don't have to put this. You can just put the size. For example, this is how many square feet. Or you maybe say we're flexible on the square footage, but we want to be on the first floor based on your retail needs, signage, something like that. So again, very flexible, either or or none. You can say, look, we're flexible. We're open for a good deal in this office park at this address. So that's it. Lease premise permitted use. This one's pretty important. I don't know if I'd say it's a mandatory, but it definitely is useful to indicate to the landlord what you're planning to use the building for. Operation of a corporate office and no other purpose. That's pretty important to distinguish to them whether you're going to need that retail traffic, whether you want frontage, main road frontage, whether it's going to be just badged employees, or if you're going to have customers, or how frequent those customers will come over, that sort of thing. Term. We'll do a relatively short term, 5 years, with a tenant option for an additional 5-year renewal. That's pretty standard, nothing earth-shattering there, but just gives them an indication. Are we at a 5, 7, or a 10, or maybe something different? Rent, okay? So this is, again, you put your primary terms here and what you would ask for in terms of your renewal option. So I built in an increase. I don't have the calculation on what that is, but it's less than 1%. But the idea is basically to give them something, and we calculate a yearly total and a monthly total. Let's see, center those, yeah. And again, helps you when you're talking to the client or what you're doing your monthly P&L. Most businesses just want to know what this is. What's your monthly base rent going to be? Okay, we can handle that. We can afford it for that space. And then backing into this is what the broker, this is how you'll analyze it per foot, and then yearly for the landlord to make their calculations on their ROI and their equity, IRR. That's the number they need. So again, you're putting everything in a nice format that helps them understand it. I won't do the math. I'll ask the client to do it for me, because you'll be surprised at the number of clients I get that give me a price per foot, a different yearly total, and a different monthly. And I'm saying, hey guys, we've got to be consistent. None of these three numbers calculate the way that I'm doing my math calculations. So I usually ask the client to do that, and then that way I'm not responsible for any math errors. Options, again, this can be for anything. While you're in the pendency of this lease, if something else comes available, maybe you're really hot on a 8th floor spot, or you really want to get down onto a low floor, just putting it in there so that it says, hey, we're not locked into this, but we want some other flexibility while we're negotiating this lease and maybe doing the build out. We could switch. Exclusive, same, just the reverse. Security deposit, pretty standard, 1 month. Prepaid rental, pay the first month, no problem. Taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, feel free to abbreviate it. I think everybody's going to know what you're talking about. It's assuming it's a triple net. Again, but if you maybe are just on a net lease, then maybe you'll knock off some of your costs and saying, well, I think this is a better situation for just a net lease or something like that. So you can indicate what you want the landlord to pick up. And again, it depends on the market. It depends on what leverage you have. But you can make this reflect what you ideally want, and whether the landlord responds or negotiates, that all depends on the market and your leverage. This is something you put in there just for your own calculations. It's not binding on the landlord, but it does indicate to them, hey, we've done some research, or we know what a building like this should cost. We're estimating, or we're budgeting from our client's point of view, $5 a foot. If that number is wildly higher, it might blow up the ability for our client to commit to this lease and support the triple net charges and everything. So you just got to have a number in here, and they'll scratch it out and say it should be $7 a foot, or it's actually $3. Okay, great. Whatever that number is, the more information you can put in, it just helps frame your client's assumptions. Utilities, yeah, that's normal. Maintenance, again, there's always some flexibility for negotiating between maintenance and what's common area. If you have dedicated HVAC, sometimes they'll make that a tenant responsibility to maintain and do the inspections on that. But if you have a large chiller, or like a screw type chiller and boiler, that's going to be a landlord responsibility with the cost pass on to the tenant. Construction, again, this is at TI. That's very subject to negotiation. First right of refusal. This one's pretty common, maybe for growing businesses. If there's a vacant space adjacent to it, and you'll define what is adjacent, whether it's across the hallway or not, versus just parallel on the side, then they get a first right of refusal. That can be really critical both for the tenant. That can be a huge boon for you if you need it. It slows down the landlord a little bit in the sense they have to give you a time period when you've reviewed the space and had time to reject it, and they have to get that written rejection. But it's maybe a minor cost to induce a tenant to sign. TI allowance, again, this one might be kind of small, but for that lease, maybe it's normal. Again, it just depends on the age of the building, what the tenant use is, and what the prior use was too. So signage, again, pretty important. If you want a sign, you got to put it in there. If you're not looking for a sign, I would just delete this. I would say if you're not looking to put something on a monument or some type of building sign, I would just remove this. Just take it away. Use of name, again. I add things that my client wants, and I ask them what's important to them, and then you add it in. If you don't need to put this name on your website, if you don't need to put the office park on your business cards, then you don't need to specifically put it in there. And if the landlord is going to agree, they're gonna skim over this clause without even a second thought. Rents commitment, this is a little bit of free rent period, or you're open. Again, it's all flexible. Yeah, so 60 days here, and you had that first prepaid. Brokerage, so we have you have a broker in this type of deal. May or may not be people on this watching this video may be representing yourself, and so you've skipped the broker. Maybe you're working with a lawyer. No problem. If there's no commission, you just want to identify that we don't have the commission, and you definitely don't want to give a double commission to the landlord's agent, and so you want to specify here in this initial. This one is a little bit tricky. Same with the brokerage, I guess, if there's ever a legal dispute. I talked about this in my article, whether this is a non-binding LOI, but now we've snuck in a clause here that is meant to be binding. It's meant to stand up in court, and we don't have a ton of language. So what I would say is that, subject to how enforceable this one is, we would probably err on the side of this whole agreement not to be binding. And what I mean is, if they violate this confidentiality and you try to sue them, we would probably take the position that it's not meant to be binding. The whole document is not binding. And we're not trying to carve out enforceability of just one sentence within the whole agreement that we've previously said is non-binding. It's definitely a conflict, and it can be confusing. So we'll take the position, this is more just, we want this to be confidential. We're going to keep it confidential. If landlord, you don't keep it, we're not going to pursue it. But we would request that it's confidential in so much as it's not legally enforceable. So again, tell them, you're happy to look at financial, cash flow statements. If you want to indicate which documents you want them to look at, that's very helpful too. So if you have audited financials, just put audited financials, and they'll say, the landlord will look at it and say, okay, we're going to get a good look. If you haven't finished, or for some reason you have a hold on 2018, and you guys haven't even finished 2019, let alone haven't finished 2018, let alone 2019, you may want to indicate that your financials are lagging a little bit, but you can give some revenue numbers or some net expenses. Try to keep it nice. You are sending this to a person, so if the broker is sending this in, they will be sending it in on your behalf, like that. And then make it easy for the landlord to just look at this and give them a little signature. And again, you're really just trying to define the outline, the very broad outline of the scope of a lease agreement. And I've listed top ones. You can add or subtract clauses depending on your needs, and I hope this was helpful for you.